What are the reasons for this evening's session with Rex Patrick? Environmental groups often do not have their views listened to by government at all levels of government, and too often our voices are drowned out by well-paid lobbyists from big business. Profit often wins over environmental protection. We need environmental groups to have more influence with decision makers. Rex Patrick kindly offered to share his experience in influencing government, as well as making your views effective in influencing government policy. I might say a few words about Sustainable Population Australia to those of you who are not familiar with this. Sustainable Population Australia is a non-partisan and is a not-for-profit environmental group. We advocate for increased awareness of the limits and the impacts of Australia's population. We promote awareness that an ecologically sustainable population depends on its renewable resources. We need policies first leading to stabilisation of Australia's population. We encourage low migration and reject involuntary population control. People fleeing war, persecution, and disasters need all the help we can provide through refugee schemes. We also reject any immigration based on race, ethnicity, or religion. It is the numbers that we are concerned about. So, by way of introduction to Rex this evening, I'll briefly say a few words about him before he talks on how to influence government. Rex was known as the Transparency Warrior during his time as a federal senator from 2017 to 2022. In addition to the normal tools used by senators to enforce transparency of government, he also made use and still makes use of many freedom of information requests in the public interest. He also made, at that time, numerous requests under South Australian freedom of information laws, worked through the Ombudsman and the South Australia Civil and Administrative Tribunal reviews. Before entering politics, Rex served as a submariner in the Royal Australian Navy, then was in various roles of business over many years. He narrowly lost to Jane Lomax-Smith in the November 2022 City of Adelaide mayoral election. He's lived and worked in the real world and will provide insights into the political process that help people like us achieve better results with government in protecting our precious environment. Over to Rex.
I'm not someone who criticises lobbyists. They have a particular skill. It's just unfortunate that in order to afford a lobbyist, you often have to be a very big company. But the idea of efficient communication with an MP or a minister or a departmental official is not a bad idea. And that always led me to think, wouldn't it be good if we had people who suddenly found out that in their neighbourhood there's going to be some fracking and they wanted to oppose that? Wouldn't it be good if there was a dummy or a dummy's guide to influencing government? Because what then happens is people then learn very slowly as they're tackling government all the things they should have done, and by the time they get to the end of it, they may not have been successful in their endeavours, but they'll know a lot more about what to do next time. Okay, and that's what people find themselves in. I know David Noonan's here has done a lot of campaigns, and you'd probably agree with the first one you did. You had no idea exactly what you're doing, and now you're quite skilled at chipping away and getting some results, getting some change out of government. So there we go. That's just to open up things a little bit. So this is my draft of my how to influence, Dummy's Guide to Influencing Government, okay? So it might be about as worth while to you as the money you paid to come and see me, which I understand was nothing. Okay, so we'll just see how we go. So I did spend some time just sitting down today thinking about how I was going to communicate this. So I'm not here to tell you how to go and talk to an MP about an issue you've got with Services Australia. Okay, that's not why I'm here. If you did have an issue with Services Australia, you can go to an MP. Well, you could go to a lawyer. You could escalate a matter to in a department, perhaps inside Services Australia. You could go to a lawyer and get some assistance, or you could go to an MP. And I can tell you, MPs do have access inside, for example, Services Australia that you don't have. We have our own phone numbers that we can call Services Australia and talk on behalf of a constituent. Jackie Lambie, who I'm doing a bit of work now, she even has a special line into DVA, Defence Veterans, because she does so much veterans work, and I think they're a bit scared of her. So they've given her a phone number that her office are always dealing with DVA and getting good results. That's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about, and I'm not just going to restrict myself to environmental issues, just how do you influence government in general? That might be to get a project of a particular type up, to stop a project. It could be to change a policy, because it might be because you want better laws. And there's no single answer on how you best go about doing this, but what I am going to do is walk you through some fundamentals about how you need to tackle government on any issue that you might come across. So I'm going to draw 3 lines. This line is time. The next line I want to talk about is width. And the third line might be depth. Now, I say time because if you think you can walk into a minister's office and just get a change just like that, unlikely. Unless you're Gina Reinhardt, maybe, or someone. If you've got $1 billion, you don't have to come to this class, maybe, okay? When you try to influence government, you're going to have to think about how you do that over time. And that time might include across 2 governments. We're in a good situation now, or an interesting situation now, where there may be a change of government in 70 days' time. Okay, and anyone who's running a long-term strategy will have been talking to the current government and the future government. You'll find getting in to see an opposition member, particularly an opposition minister, is much easier to do when they are in opposition than when they become a minister. Okay, so you need to be thinking about potentially long-term how you're going to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. In terms of when I talk about width, I'm going to be talking about stakeholders. If you think you can go along to a senator or a member or a government official and with one meeting get what you want, you're probably wrong. Okay, you're going to have to identify as part of whatever thing that you're trying to achieve, who are the stakeholders. Okay, and you're going to have to run with a number of stakeholders, developing specific messages for different stakeholders. Your local member, you might frame up an issue in terms of jobs or community satisfaction. For an official, you might talk about cost. Depending on who it is you're talking to, the messaging will be different. The other thing that happens along here with width, so as well as having a whole bunch of stakeholders, the other thing you want to think about is your own team. If you have an issue that you think, hey, I've got this great issue, I want to go to government, or I want to go to an MP, if you turn up to my office as a single person and say, I've got this really cool idea, or I've got this policy thing that I want to change, but you haven't been able to mobilize at least a few other people around you, I'm probably not going to give you much attention. Okay, if you know, the way you might say, hey, Rex, in a democracy, you're supposed to represent me. But the reality is I'm here to represent a community as well. And so if it's an individual issue, of course I'm going to represent you. If it's some bigger idea, I will expect you to have some other people that are sharing your vision and are prepared to work with you to promote this, because you're going to have to do that anyway when you start looking across multiple stakeholders that you have to engage with. Okay, so I think it's fair that if you want a senator's time or a member's time or a departmental official's time or a minister's time, that we're not just talking about your pet idea. If you can't get community support, some community support for it, then it would make people think, do I want to push with this? Because as a senator or a member or a government official, you've only got a certain amount of time available to you. If you turn up as a single person, you might even find it hard to get a meeting as a single person. If you turn up as the Conservation Society or a group of people, you're firstly likely to have greater chance of getting a meeting, and you're likely to have greater weight in terms of the influence that you might have. You might also look around for other groups that have similar ideas to you where you can cooperate. So numbers help when you're dealing with influencing of government. So I'm going to call that width in terms of stakeholders and your own ability to have people standing beside you caring about your issue as well. In terms of depth, what I'm talking about is strategy. You have to have a strategy. And again, part of that strategy might be identifying who the stakeholders are, identifying who the players are in this particular issue that you're dealing with. I was mentioning to David before that when I was looking at a high-level radioactive waste facility, looking at a document, I went to the Australian Radioactive Waste Agency, I went to ANSTO, I went to ARPANSA, I went to industry, I went to defence, because I know they are all engaged in that particular activity as stakeholders. When I talk about strategy, I'm going to be thinking about what's the best way to achieve what it is I want to achieve, what time is required, what stakeholders are required. And, in terms of time, maybe the first meeting you have with a minister or a senator is just to introduce yourself as a group. And maybe the second meeting you have might be where you put a bit of pressure on. You say, look, this is something we'd like to pursue. I've had people who've had my phone number and they text me every day with lengthy articles, not realising me as a senator, I have no time at all. And so what happens is I simply stop looking. So even just in terms of how you engage with an MP or a minister or an official, you've got to think about that. How often do I engage? What's the threshold for saying we now need to go back to the minister? And that's sometimes it's good to have a group of people who you can talk that out and think that out with. Lots of people just fire off stuff all the time, having been given a phone number, and even doing that to advisors or to constituent officers or to officials, junior officials, and sometimes it doesn't help. Okay, so you want to think about that in your strategy. So I just want to keep that in mind, okay, as we talk about some more things about when you're influencing government. Just keep that in your mind. They're the three axes we're working off of. Now, in terms of who we end up influencing, it's good to understand a little bit about government. Okay, so you know who you're working with and who you are, and what sort of things they can do and what they can't do. So let's just go back to Civics 101, and I apologise if some of you know this off by heart, but in our system of government, we have Parliament or the legislature. That's where our MPs and our senators sit. Okay, now just understand, as a senator, I could order no one to do anything apart from my own staff. I have no authority at all as an MP or a senator. I have influence, but I can't actually instruct anyone to do something. If I met a public official, they're probably going to be nice to me because they know that when I wander into the chamber next time, I can sit next to their minister and have a bit of a chin wag. I don't have to make an appointment with the minister. I can do it in the chamber. Okay, so the next part of government is the executive, and that's departments. They're people who are in effect governing. All right, they do have certain powers to do things. They have lots of money to spend things, and there's a bit in the middle here where there's a crossover. And this is different, so to the United States, but certainly in the Westminster system, we have ministers who are members of our legislature, but also members of the executive. So they have a dual role. Then there's another body, which is separate in every single way, which is the judiciary. They may be useful in influencing. Ask the people who ran the campaign against the low-level radioactive waste management facility in Kimber, because ultimately it was the court that set aside a decision of a minister. So you might want to think about them as an option. Now, generally it's an expensive option because to get into a courtroom, I've got one matter in the federal court at the moment, cost me $5,700 just to lodge the matter. Okay, and that's without any legal, paying any lawyers. Okay, so that can be an expensive process, but courts can do things like injunct. That is to stop the executive from doing something. That might buy you time. They can do things like make declarations. Things like saying this is the law, so that the executive, who generally have to follow the law, understand that they can or can't do something or what the boundaries are. They could set aside a decision by way of judicial review. So they can look at a decision that's been made up here and they can set aside that decision potentially. So the courts do have a role, but I'm not really here to tell you how to advocate to a court. That's the role of lawyers and silks, barristers and so forth. But they do potentially have a part in proceedings. I use it sometimes when I'm trying to get the government to do something because I've been around courts long enough. Sometimes I'll draft a court notice of some sort, a writ of mandamus, for example, which is where the court can force an official to perform a duty that they're supposed to perform, like give me a document under FOI. And just sending off the application to the agency and saying, I don't want to go to court, but I'm really down to my last option here. How about you have a conversation with me? I found that to be very effective, okay, because they don't want to go to court. The executive, just so you understand, when I'm talking about the executive, I'm talking about the Department of Education, Department of Human Services, the Department of Defence, the Attorney General's Department. These are all the officials filled with public servants. Understand that the executive generally are the people with the money. Politicians don't have money. Parliamentarians don't have money. We get assigned money to run our office, and we get money given to us we assign money ourselves to the parliamentary services that help us do committees and so forth, but we don't have any money. It is the legislature which gives the money to the executive. That's what's going to happen next parliamentary sitting week when the Treasurer stands up and says, here's my budget. The House will vote on it, then the Senate will vote on it, and that's how we pass money to the executive, who are not allowed to do anything that has not been appropriated by the Parliament. So they can't just go and spend the money however they like. They do have to have permission from the Parliament to spend money on particular things. They might not spend it wisely. That's a different story. The other thing to understand is, so they have the money, but the other thing that's interesting about the executive is they, unlike you and I, we can do anything we want to do, provided there's no law that says we can't. Different for the executive. They can do nothing unless there's a law that says they can. Okay, so that they actually work the opposite to us citizens. And again, who gives them who writes those laws? That's the role of the legislature. So the legislature writes the laws, and the legislature also does the oversight. They're the two things that happen in the legislature. Okay, so we need to just understand who's doing what as you're advocating, as you're working out what is your strategy. It might be that the executive work up a policy option to do something, and you want to be in there. You want to be in there influencing that policy making process. And often they can develop a policy, and they can then go and execute that policy without ever going back to the government. Without ever going back to the Parliament, because the laws simply may allow them to already do that sort of stuff. Well, on certain occasions, the executive might work up a policy. The policy goes to cabinet. Cabinet then says, which is a collection of ministers. Then they might have to say we have to go back to the legislature to get legal permission to do something. Robo-debt's a good example of that, where the executive came up with a policy, and they decided they didn't need to change the law. They just proceeded, and it turned out the court eventually told them the law doesn't allow you to do that. You should have gone back to the legislature and changed the law. Scott Morrison should have taken legislation to the Parliament, and because the Parliament then gets to decide what the laws are. So depending on what you're trying to influence, you've just got to be mindful of the different players that are in the game. There are some other players we need to think about. The media and other NGOs, non-government organisations that may have similar similar ideas to you. Sometimes that can get a bit political, but there might be areas where interests overlap, and you should talk to people as you develop your ideas and your strategies over time. I used to have people come to me and say, Rex, you're good at media. Why don't you do a media article with us? And I'd say, look, I can do that. But you know what? It only makes sense if it fits into your strategy. Okay, you got to think about the timing of the things that you do and how that works into your strategy. And we'll see, later. I know Anne's done a lot of work in the Hills on infrastructure, and it's a bit of an effort to get media stories up. And that's one of the things I've helped Anne out with is FOIs that get new stories up, that keep the fire burning, that keeps the media interested in. We like the media to be interested because they tend to influence these people as well, en masse. When the Prime Minister's calling up a minister saying, why am I getting bad press on this? So the minister might seek to avoid that. So again, just understand there are other organisations that are also useful. I do want to just break this apart a little bit. In terms of the legislature, and again, remember, they just do rules, the laws, and they do oversight. Oversight can be really cool. I remember one time the in relation to an oil and gas tenement off Port Lincoln. For every year, Beach Petroleum would renew, well, not every year, but every 5 years, they'd simply renew their tenement. I went along to Senate estimates where I was doing an oversight role of the executive and asked the question, why do you keep renewing this when the general policy is you either drill or you give up your tenement. Use it or lose it was the policy. And I did that knowing quite well they didn't have the capacity to drill, to do it. They didn't have the financial capacity to do that. And in the conversation I had with the official, I got them to agree that they needed to talk to the community in Port Lincoln because the tourism industry and the fishing industry were not investing whilst this thing was sitting there. And sure enough, next time around, it was gone. Okay, so that's just a good example of where you can work with the community and just have the legislature in its oversight role putting pressure on the executive. And again, think about how that fits into your strategy. At what time do you need that to happen? Okay, so just thinking about, I just want to break out into the legislature, just ignoring ministers for the moment, that we have two houses in our parliament, in our federal parliament. And again, sorry, I should say that these rules apply also for a state issue. And it is important as you think about your particular thing that you want to influence on, is it a state issue or is it a federal issue? No point going to the federal parliament to lobby on a particular issue that turns out to be a state issue, because I just say I have no power. So a federal senator, for example, can't, when an inquiry's happened, they can't call officials from a state government because there's what's called a principle of comity. We say that it is for the South Australian Parliament to have oversight of South Australian government departments, not the federal government. We have oversight of the federal departments. So you need to think about, is your issue a state issue? Is it a federal issue? Sometimes it can be both. Health, for example, is a good one where it involves federal and it involves state, and understanding who does what can be a little bit challenging from time to time. Another example of that is education. We see actually the state government seems to run the universities, but the feds seem to fund it, and it can be a little bit confusing sometimes. So you've got to know which one you've got to go to. But in the federal space, we have the House of Representatives, the Greenhouse. I used to tell kids we don't talk about the name of that as a senator. It's like Baltimore. We just say the other. When we talk in the chamber, we say the other place, and they do the same. Okay, or the Senate. Now, out on the hustings, I can tell you not many people really do understand the difference between the two. So I just apologise here if I'm gonna, if I draw a map of Australia, something like that, Tasmania down the bottom there, and we've got Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. It's probably not quite right there, but South Australia, NT, Western Australia. The House of Representatives, there are 151 members, I think it is, and it's divided up equally across our country's population. So South Australia gets 10 seats in the lower house. We used to have 11 a year or so ago, sorry, a term or so ago, dropped down to 10. Why? Because our population relative to the rest of Australia was dropping. Okay. So South Australia might have 10. So typically each electorate's about 140,000 people. Grey, the electorate of Grey, is 92% of South Australia. Okay, because there's a cross between Whyalla, Port Lincoln, Cooper Pedy, Kadina. There's about 140,000 people. In Adelaide, there are 7 electorates, because the other two are Barker, which is quite big, and Mayo. okay, which are the big ones. But just understand, we have 10 representatives in the House of Reps. Then think about Sydney and how many people are in Sydney and New South Wales. And don't quote me on this number, but it's somewhere like they've got around about 50 members. Okay, and then we might say that, and I am making these numbers up, but might be that Queensland has 40 and Victoria has 40 as well. Okay, the numbers aren't quite adding up, but the point is the eastern states have much more influence in the House of Reps than South Australia and Western Australia and Tasmania. Okay, it's frustrating. You think about our MPs here in South Australia, because you want to go and influence them, and you want to know what their power is. Well, they have to, if you're trying to get lots and lots of money for something in South Australia, these guys are competing against a caucus or a party room that have a lot more people in the eastern states. And that's the way it works. Okay, so already we are here in South Australia at some disadvantage. Until we talk about the Senate, I'm going to use red here because the Senate is red. Okay, anyone know how many senators we have here in South Australia? 12. We have 12 senators representing South Australia. Anyone know how many senators we have in New South Wales? 12. Okay, and you can see it follows around that each of the states have 12. That is by design. That's why we call the Senate the States House, because the Senate is the place where you can get a bit of evenness and try and push back a little bit from those East Coasters, right? So, just be aware of that, but also be aware that if you live in Sturt, for example, James Stephens is your House of Rep member. Okay, so you want to go and talk to him about something? Maybe you don't. If you want to talk to your local member, that's James Stephens if you're in Sturt. But you have 12 senators that represent the whole of South Australia that are available to you. And one of the things you want to think about when you start engaging with an MP about a particular topic, as part of your strategy, you're going to look and say, well, let's go and see if Sarah Hanson-Young has talked on this topic. Let's go and see if Penny Wong has talked on this topic. Who are the right people to contact? If it's a left issue, you might be better off with some of the Labor or Green senators. Barbara Pocock's the other Green senator here in South Australia. Or alternatively, you might be you got something on the right side, then you're going to be talking to Alex Antic and David Fawcett and Anne Ruston. And a lot of people don't understand the importance of the Senate. It is the bit where we balance things out a little bit. The other thing you need to be aware of, and this is just how things work, and this is just before you decide to go and knock on the door of an MP, is in that it doesn't really matter whether it's House of Reps or Senate. I'll just describe to you. When I used to go and vote in the Senate chamber, so the bells would ring and I would walk into the chamber and I'd look at my phone, knowing full well my legislation advisor was keeping a watch on the Senate. She knew what the vote was, and I'd sat down with her and told her, when this amendment comes up, this is the way I'm going to vote. And she'd send me a text, or she might even be sitting in the back of the Senate chamber, so she's readily available for me to talk to. Okay, but I would walk in and I go, right, do I need to be on the no side or the yes side? Because that's the two choices you get in supporting something or not supporting something. I would sit down sometimes, as I was an independent, I would sit down next to a Labor member, or maybe the next time a Liberal member. And I used to sometimes say to them, do you know what we're voting on? And then say to me, no idea what they were voting on. Why is that? Because when you're a member of a party, you walk into this chamber and you look to see where your whip is sitting. Is your whip sitting at the no side or the yes side? And that's where you sit. And if you want to do something different, you might find yourself in the same place as Fatima Payman, where she got kicked out of the party. Or in the case of the Liberals or the Nationals who can cross the floor, it is still frowned upon, and it may affect their pre-selection of the next election. The best they can do, if they don't want to vote on something, is not turn up. If the vote's really tight, they will be told they have to turn up. And this is the point in which I say that unless you're dealing with an independent, you are dealing with someone who has to stick within guardrails. And why is that important for you to know? Because you might want to lobby about something and the MP you go and talk to may even agree with you, but won't be able to step outside the party lines. And you just need to think about that as you go and talk to people that you need to talk to. And who sets those guardrails? Either the caucus, if it's the Labor Party, or the shadow cabinet, either cabinet or shadow cabinet really set those guardrails. They are generally ministers, which is why sometimes if you can get to see a minister, that can be helpful. Am I suggesting you only go and see a minister? Absolutely not. So we're going to talk about how you might handle these guys. So just be mindful of that your local MP may well agree with you. They may sit and say, yeah, look, I really think what you're doing is good, but they're not able to do much more than just listen to you. But what actually happens is, and I've seen this, right? Someone walks in I've seen a rookie arrive in the parliament, and they are all good people when they first arrive, okay, and but they then find out that they're trapped a little bit. And they find out that, you know what, the only way I'm going to ever really be able to influence is if I get to be a minister. And so for the rest of their time, they sit on the backbench and just do what they're told, working their way up until the point where they become a minister. Okay, and that's sadly what happens. Next time you watch Parliament and you see the Prime Minister standing at the dispatch box, look behind him and there are normally 10 front bench ministers who really all want to be where he is. And all the backbenchers really want to be where the front bench is. And all the people on the other side of the chamber in the opposition want to be on the government side. No one's happy except the independents, because we're sitting on the crossbench knowing that we're never going to go any further than that. We just represent people in the manner in which they've come and expressed a view to us. We don't have guardrails. So the benefit is an independent can really represent you, but they're never going to be in government. So you just got to work out the strengths and weaknesses of the people that you're advocating to, and use all of them. I used to say to people, okay, I'm happy to go in the Senate chamber and do a speech on this or do something on this. And, go and tell your local member that Rex is going to do something. See if you can shake them out of their rut. Use me against them. You've got to think about how you're going to do that. Think about the characteristics of the players inside the Senate and the House of Reps, and think about how you're going to try and utilise them. And there's all sorts of tactics. So let me tell you, one of the bills, and this is actually quite rare. I got a bill through the Senate, what's called a private member's bill. Very rare to do that. The bill was on stopping goods that were made by slave labour, stopping them being imported, stopping the import of those goods into Australia. Now that started off here in South Australia with a bunch of Uyghurs, and my bill originally was it was focused on Xinjiang in China and the Uyghurs. And along the way, I had all sorts of anti-slavery people knocking on my door saying, Rex, why don't we widen this to everywhere? And I kept saying no, because the politics were right for me, because at that stage there were lots of China hawks in the Parliament. And when I sent that bill to an inquiry, I sent it to the committee that had Kimberly Kitching, God bless her soul, she's sadly passed, and Erica Betts, right? And I did that because those two people, the chair and deputy chair, were China hawks. So they would be sympathetic to my view. And sure enough, I got a committee report In fact, I remember David Fawcett came up to me, the South Australian senator came up and said, Rex, we're going to support your bill, but we're going to change it to being all jurisdictions, slave goods from all jurisdictions. And I said to David, that's good. And when you announce that, I'm going to go with it. But until I do, for political reasons, because I want the push, I'm going to keep going the way that I was. And I was assuring everyone else along the way that that's where we'd end up. And that's where we did end up. The committee came out with a bipartisan view, and I very quickly then amended my bill. In fact, I introduced a new bill that absolutely reflected what the committee had said. Where I said, hang on, Labor and Liberal have agreed to this. Got it into the chamber very quickly. Now, that's because I was nimble as an independent. What will happen is that bill would never have got up if you were trying to get a Labor or Liberal person to push it through, because they would have been sticking within the guardrails. Even though if you said to a Labor member, they would have said, of course I want slave labour from Xinjiang. But it would have been people in the cabinet saying, we've got to manage our relationship with China, blah, 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 blah. So, that's an example of just using, you've got to use all of the different techniques, because you've got to have a strategy in there. And can I tell you, when I was working with the Uyghurs on that particular issue, in terms of timing, we did things like a couple of different motions in the Senate, then we did a bill, then we did a Senate committee, then we had a vote, and along the way, every time something happened, like I needed a Senate committee vote, those Uyghurs would turn up to Parliament House as a group. They would protest out the front, and the week before they had been, every one of them had been to ministers, MPs all around the state. Sorry, all around the country. And that's a lesson in terms of how do you get your issue. If you think you can just go to one MP and that's going to lead you to a success, you are wrong. You have to think about all the different players and how you're going to work them over time as part of your strategy. That's what lobbyists get paid for. Smart people that know this. Okay, and they know how to engage, who to engage, and so forth. Again, I said to you that a senator doesn't have any power. Neither does a member of parliament. A minister may in their portfolio. When you go and have your talk to your MP as part of your strategy, again, I said before you go in, you've got to know what the short message is that you're going to give them, the short bit of information, and what it is you want from them. What sort of things can you get out of an MP or a senator? In the case of a senator, because it's often easier because the government doesn't have the numbers, how can a senator or an MP help you in your cause? And again, I'm not saying you exercise this just for the sake of it. You've got to build it into your strategy. You can have an MP ask a question on notice, okay, to help garner information, to get information, or even just to signal that there's an MP that's interested in it. So what happens is the question goes from the senator's office to the tabling office. The tabling office sends it to the minister's office. The minister's office sends it across to the department, and the department are now going, someone's thinking about this. Okay, so it goes onto someone's radar now. Okay, that's how you got to play the game here. Right, a question on notice. Or, if you need the theatre of it, a question without notice at question time is another thing that a senator can do. A senator can write a letter to a minister. That should be on your list of potential things that are happening. You writing a letter to a minister will not have as great effect as me writing as a senator, if I was a senator, writing a letter to a minister. I will get a reply, and it will be a considered reply. Okay, that's a general rule. If you've got an immigration issue about your family, I'm probably going to do that for you. If you've got some policy idea, I'm unlikely to do that for you, but unless you've got a group of people who are like-minded, so I can see there's weight behind your proposal, then I might be prepared to write to a minister. That's something that an MP can do for you. An MP can call for an inquiry. No better way of getting access to getting some attention. Now, David will remember when I was a senator, I called an inquiry into the selection process for the radioactive waste management facility at Kimber. I did so on very neutral terms. I just said, I want to make sure this process is being run fairly. But suddenly now I had all the resources available to me from the Senate. We had a whole bunch of senators now get dragged into the whole thought process. We get lots and lots of submissions, lots of people advocating. There's some media that will flow from that, and ultimately some output as well. So a Senate inquiry can be quite a useful thing. Now, of course, as a senator, I have to get 39 votes to get an inquiry up. So that might take me working with you guys for you to be feeding in and talking to other people so that there is a bit of support before I bring my motion to the floor of the Senate. I would think that you have somehow helped to influence people saying, can you just let this get across the line? Even if you don't agree, you know, a Senate inquiry is not about voting for a law or for policy. It's just about inquiring into something, and you should be able to convince an MP or a senator to support that, because it's just inquiring. It's just finding more information about something. Another thing a senator can do is get what's called an order for production of documents. That is, command that the executive hand over documents. Another thing a senator can do or a member can do is get media for you. Every journo loves to have a senator or MP in a story. Okay, it adds to the story. And if you can find an MP or a senator who's got good media rapport, and this can be hard because remember those guardrails? For most MPs, they're not allowed to do media. The Labor Party gets elected on a brand. The Liberal Party gets elected on a brand. When we have an election in 5 weeks' time, 5 or 6 weeks' time, that's going to be run on a competition between Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. They're going to get all of the attention, done on a brand. If I said to you, who are the South Australian senators? Now, I've already named a few tonight. You probably would have no idea who they are. Anyone think they could get all 12? I can name all 12, but that's because I used to work with them all. But they do get elected on a brand, and they basically are constrained in what they can do. So generally, if something's going to happen on an issue in the media, it's going to be the shadow minister that does that. Okay, so they might not have as much flexibility. What I'm saying to you is, if you can find a Teal or an independent, they have a lot more freedom in respect of media. So again, it's about understanding who you're working with and what the pros and cons are. Do you come to an independent to get certain things? Yes, an inquiry up or a media article or so forth. But do you not then go to, or do you then just ignore the parties? Of course not. Of course not. You've got to actually, this comes down to the width of your campaign. That's why very rarely can a single person who's got an issue really progress it. You've got to have a strategy in place. So I just want to now go quickly, I've got about 10 minutes left, to think about as you're developing your strategy. One of the things you need to know is that in politics, information is the currency of power. Having information is critical to your success. And there are many different ways for you to get information. One of them is to do an FOI. And again, you need to have strategy about that. If you're leading a particular campaign and then you put an FOI and the department says, that bloody troublemaker, you get him to do the FOI. So he's a bit isolated. I actually do FOIs for companies because they don't want to be seen to be, if you like, niggling away at government. They don't want to be seen to be not working with government. So I, in some sense, give them some anonymity. When I get an FOI, it goes straight onto the disclosure log and everyone else can have access to it. I'm not lobbying. I'm simply helping people get access to information. So one of the things I do is train MP staffers from all sides of politics, because I say transparency is a good thing no matter what. I used to have people come into my office and they'd say, I don't like the airport the training centre they're setting up at the airport in Port Lincoln. And I'd be thinking, you know what, I kind of like the idea of jobs. How harmful is this? Tell you what I'll do. I'll do an FOI for you so you can find out what the council were talking about when they approve this. So you can actually help people say, I don't agree with you, but I'm going to help you get more information. Information is not a bad thing. So FOI might be one way of getting access to information, but there are lots of other ways. If you're on if I had my laptop set up, I could have potentially brought this up on a screen, but just have a look at all the Senate inquiries that have been done on the topics that you're trying to press. You can just Google the word Senate inquiry and then the name of what it is that you're interested in. And I did one. I was going to bring it up on screen. We just don't quite have the right organisation here, but or can you? Do a Google for me, a vaginal mesh Senate inquiry. Okay, I'll do that because it's a bit confronting for us guys to go, what the hell's one of that? What's that? It's a really serious issue. But if I want to know a little bit about that, Senate inquiry is the other word, Senate inquiry and vaginal mesh. Okay, it's a real problem that exists, but the Senate's done an inquiry into that. So if I want to know a little bit about that, I simply go and have a look at the report in relation to that. If you did that, you would find, well, you go to the report and it'll lay out a whole bunch of things. You go, oh, I didn't know anything about this topic at all. And you can walk away a bit of an expert on it just by reading through the Senate inquiry. Then what you do is you go and have a look at the submissions, because then you find out who else is interested in this topic, because that's helpful to you. And if you're really keen, you then go and have a look at the hearings that were held. And when you click on the PDF, you'll ring up and you'll see that David Noonan's appeared in a few Senate inquiries on a few different topics. And so you can try and chase him down and give him a call and say, hey, this is an area of interest. Yeah, you can't do it, doesn't matter. Look, I apologize. We don't need to. But that's what you can do. You do oil and gas, Senate inquiry. Search Google. Okay, there's a ton of information that's there for you. What I do on weekdays, and I'm able to do this, on my screen I have the House up and I have the Senate up, and because I know how to look at things like something called the dynamic red to see what's happening in the Senate, or the House live minutes. I watch sometimes when bills come up. I just have in background the debate that's going on. And you just learn about different topics, but that doesn't mean you can't search through the Hansard for a particular topic that you are trying to advocate on, and see who's been talking about it. That's something handy. See, when you go and meet an MP, the first thing I do, if you were running a campaign on how to deal with vaginal mesh, you would go to the Senate inquiry and have a look at which senators attended, because that's a good starting point on who you might want to start advocating with, because you're not happy with the results of the report. It hasn't been dealt with for 3 years, so you now want to go back in, find those senators that were involved in that report, or those members of parliament that were involved in that particular report. That's a starting point for you. As you think about, how do I get into the House, because as part of our strategy, we're going to do something we're going to have something happening in the Senate or something happening in the House, or a proposal for a law change, is how do you combine the media together with perhaps visits from your team of people to each member of parliament? And when you look at each member of parliament, you should know what they think about the topic, because it'll be on the Hansard if they care about it one way or another. So before you go in to see Senator David Fawcett, the Senate allows you to put some words in a keyword search and say, I want to see what David Fawcett said about that. Okay, so that's available again, so that you can lobby better, so that you know. And it might be that the message that you go in to talk to David Fawcett about is a different message that you go in and talk to Senator Holly Hughes about. Same topic, but the messaging might be different. And that's the same also when you start talking to the executive. How do you find out who in the executive you need to talk to? Well, simply go and have a look at Senate estimates. Every Senate estimates, there are 8 committees that cover every topic of federal government. So there's the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade. There's education and employment. There's community affairs, anything to do with social welfare, legal and constitutional. There's rural affairs. I'm starting to run out now, but there's 8 different committees, standing committees in the Senate, and they run estimates where they question the executive, and at the front of every Hansard for Senate estimates, there's the list of every person who turned up, every official who turned up, and what their role is. So if you ever want to think about, well, who's the right person to talk about this, you've already got a list of names to start with. And then you can just very easily reverse engineer what their email address is as well. Again, I suggest you do this with caution, because you do not want to be hitting people at the wrong time or excessively. But you can get past gatekeepers by doing that. Other ways of getting access to information. So the media, watching what the media is doing on the topic, set up Google alerts for particular topics so that you know when things are being talked about. Ministers' press releases. There's something called the Harradine Order. This is a really classic one if you want to be a troublemaker like me. There's something called the Harradine Order, named after Brian Harradine, which requires departments to publish on their website every 6 months every new file that they've opened. And I used to go and look at those files and go, oh, that one looks interesting. I'll FOI that one. Okay, that's just me being a public interest troublemaker. Again, looking who's asked questions on notice, looking at Senate estimates, looking at what's going on in those areas that you're talking about. I'll just wrap it up because we've hit 8 o'clock. The other thing is to know how to engage. So you've got to know who to engage, and then think about how to engage them. And again, that means you might want to be talking to departmental officials. You might want to be talking to MPs. You might want to be talking to ministers. You might want to be talking to other NGOs. But know when you go in to talk to them, have a plan about what it is you want to say to them, what you want to get across to them, and what you want back from them at this point in time. And you may well have meetings with them from time to time. Some players will just work the offices of each MP, knowing that, well, there might be a change of government. And so that they want to already have a relationship, not just with the MP, but with their advisors. Okay, and you've got to think like that as well. Okay, you've got to be careful about being pestery as well. You've got to find the right balance and all of that. The other thing you can do under something called the Information Publication Scheme, you can actually, most departments will have their org chart as well. So you can look and see who's in the org chart. So when I get frustrated with a department and I want to send one of these court applications with a writ of mandamus to an official, I just go and find out who the general counsel is, look at their name, and then you work out the email address and you fire it into there. And within a few moments, you normally get a reply saying, "I'm on to it, Mr. Patrick. Just can you give me a couple of days?" So I'll wrap up now and just say, look, coming back to what I started with, if you want to influence government, you have to be sophisticated about it. You have to have a plan that works over time with a whole range of different stakeholders and a whole bunch of people supporting you with a strategy of some sort. Okay, we could do another session on this talking about controlling government, but I've run out of time. I hope that's been a little bit helpful for you. And one of the things I would say is, social. I didn't mention social media, but that is another way you can, if you're clever, you can influence an MP. I'll tell you some things that don't work. getting bombarded with emails, form emails from when I was a senator, I used to tell my staff, just ignore them. Okay, if there's a personal email, sounding email, I'd say we'll respond to that one. But if it was clearly just been generated by someone who said, everyone send this to your MP, we wouldn't respond to them. I might say, well, actually, so clearly there are some people, a bunch of people who care about this particular issue. I can't tell whether they're necessarily from my electorate. A lot of personal emails, I'd say people have taken the time and effort to write stuff out here. Let's start talking to some of them. Mainstream media is very, very useful to you. And there are ways in which you can work with media as well. Like if your issue is a left issue, you're probably going to get more traction with The Guardian, with the ABC, potentially, Michael West. And the other thing you do is you go, right, the area I'm advocating is related to child protection. Look through the Sydney Morning Herald or the Age to see who the journo is that writes about that, and contact that journo about your topic. So each journo has a particular round. Try and establish which journos are in your round. Now, I, as a South Australian senator, didn't always go straight to the Advertiser or to In Daily. Sometimes I'd go to the Sydney Morning Herald or the Age, because that captured lots and lots of people, and often your MPs, their staff would be listening, and they go, "Oh, that bloody Rex Patrick, he's now advocating in the big cities about this particular issue." So yeah, even if you can't get local traction, that doesn't help for a state issue, but for a federal issue, if you can, press into interstate media. And again, you'll have much more success in doing that if you are an organisation. Mine used to be senator.patrick@aph.gov.au, and that was an email I never looked at. All right. So just to understand the process, I would get 500 emails a day come to that email address, and I had a Coro officer who sorted through those. Some of them would get flicked to me, to my private email, which at the time was send.rex@aph.gov.au. And only my staff and very few people knew that. And that was a way of filtering to make sure I wasn't getting overloaded with messages. So all MPs have a public email and a private email, and some of them will use their own Gmail accounts or other accounts as well. And that's really just about filtering to make sure that your day is not spent. But all emails are looked at by a Coro officer.
I've got a question from Jonathan Sobles, who couldn't attend tonight. Jonathan will be speaking next week about Big Thirsty Australia. And the link between population and water shortages. So Jonathan asked the question, how do you create a topic like excessive population growth rate or immigration rate as a priority? Amy Remicus recently made the point, as a journalist now working for the Australia Institute under Richard Dennis, that if the government decide an issue is a priority, it receives funding, it gets attention. How do you get it over the line? I think you've really touched on a lot of those points already.
I'm going to say my answer's up there, and throughout the conversation, these things, I mean, again, if you can't get your own popular support, then actually you're going to struggle. So, popular has, by its very essence, means that everyone is interested in it. And as we know, only 20% of people that pay attention to politics, and most people just go about their daily life until something happens where they need to engage with government. But really, it's a case of running a strategy, which is what I came to talk about.
Well, thanks everyone for coming, and particular thanks to Rex for a very informative evening. I learned lots. So we'll wrap up there, and on the way out, if you don't know who Sustainable Population is, pick up a little flyer and learn a little bit more about us. And thank you, Rex. Excellent. Thank you. Good night, everyone.